Welcome to the Trend Detection Podcast, powered by Siemens. And now your host, Niall Sullivan.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think it's interesting you touch upon that as well, because especially the cost of automotive in particular. But what are those key metrics that will help? Let's say if a CMMS project is being scheduled in for next year, and obviously metrics are a key part of maybe moving it further up the priority list. But what metrics should be taken into consideration, sort of grab attention? And I guess how, from a Brightly point of view, how do you help the prospect customer to present that internally?
I think there are a few key ones. And again, it depends on where you are in the journey. Are you starting from scratch with no CMMS? You're coming off pen and paper or Excel. How reactive to preventative are you already? And then are you coming over from an existing CMMS that you outgrew, right? Each one of those is going to present a different pain point or a different reason, which has a different inherent metric or ROI presentation that we need to help arm them with to sell, right? It's not about us presenting the ROI. It's about getting the data from them, putting it into a simple equation, and then giving them the data and letting them present on it. I think if you're starting from complete scratch, it's going to be the ROI of performing preventative maintenance. What is the ROI? Right? And we refer a lot to a Jones Lang LaSalle study that was done and I think pushed by IFMA, which was talking about for facility envelope, certain units, you can expect a ROI of 545% for doing preventative maintenance versus reactive maintenance. And they gave an example of a 350-ton chiller, right, for a facility. They said, if you do basic non-intrusive maintenance for, let's say, 10 years, right, versus you run it into the dirt after 6, and then you need another capital replacement. Let's say that thing costs $350,000 to procure. 6 years in, you're $700,000 into 2 assets. Versus if you did the $350,000 up front and then $5,500, this was their example. I was just looking at it yesterday. $5,500 per year on top of the acquisition cost after 6 or 7 years. Again, that's where you start seeing that ROI. And that may not be 545%, but they stayed in there. The longer you can delay a capital expenditure, the longer your preventive maintenance adds to the useful life of the equipment, the higher the ROI becomes. That's what everyone's trying to do is, again, our situation. If we would have taken care of those assets when they were very early on and very early in their operational phase versus a run to failure for 20 years, they probably would have been easier to maintain. Our first pass quality pass probably would have been much higher as well. And we wouldn't have probably had some of the issues that we had. But nevertheless, we were where we were. So starting for me from complete scratch, it was a little bit about the cost of performing preventative maintenance, maybe the inventory that I could save, although initially the maintenance cost side of it, right? People want to cut maintenance cost. It's like, well, to do that, that's a long-term play. If you want to cut maintenance costs in the short term, lay off your maintenance staff. Stop performing preventative maintenance. You'll cut your maintenance costs real quick. But then all of a sudden, 5 years later, you're having to bring on or outsource very expensive maintenance and skilled professionals or contractors. And they're costing you an arm and a leg because they're having to go, top to bottom, nut to the soup, replacing every component, essentially doing an overhaul, which again, in that PM to RM example, isn't cost effective. So I think that's the first one. Again, if you're more mature, it starts becoming, what is the utilization of the software? What is the adoption rate? And what are the efficiency gains from it? And I think if you're very mature, it becomes the scheduling compliance, right? How often are you staying within the set estimated hours, estimated days of the schedule? Are you staying on task? And it also becomes kind of the precision of the preventive maintenance. So in my situation, I didn't have the resources to do a failure modes effects analysis, an FMEA, or a reliability center maintenance study. Again, we were too far in the asset life, but I didn't have anything to say, okay, these are the recommended and economical value preventive maintenance schedules, the service levels to perform. I didn't have anything like that. So I was starting from complete scratch versus certain people like the Navy, you can over preventative maintenance your equipment to a point it's too intrusive and it's too costly. And the Navy's actually starting to try and modernize now and go to what they consider condition-based maintenance plus. So again, starting to tap into condition of their assets, viewing the asset health, get leading indicators of potential failures and catching it earlier on the PF curve versus, just overperforming and leaving it in this high state, which honestly, from my background, a lot of people start to gun deck. And I say gun deck, it's pencil whipping, rubber stamping, right? They just sign it off because they don't. If I have to go grease something that hasn't moved in a month every single time, like what's the point, right? No one teaches us about viscosity and lubrication breakdown. No one teaches us. No one, I think, in the military really understands why we do what we do. We just do it. And we're zombies, right? We have these written procedures a mile long and we just do it. So I think we need a cultural change of doing more value add maintenance versus just time-based maintenance.
And is the I'll say reluctance, because you're saying the Navy in that example are taking steps towards away from reactive to condition-based, or actually saying over maintenance, which is that phrase, over maintenance is better than failure. So
I mean, yes, right. Especially when you're talking about a ship that is a culmination of multiple components and systems that work interoperably and have to be ready on a moment's notice. That was my thing. I was a large weapon system maintainer and operator. So my weapon system was the tip of the spear. It was the first thing that we would start moving and potentially shoot if something was threatening us, right? So my gun had to work. And it's a definition of reliability, like the probability of it working when it's intended or needed to work in its intended function. That's not exactly the definition. That's my version. It's close enough. But again, it has to be a reliable asset. So we have to do that maintenance. But again, I can tell you right now, half of the maintenance I didn't need to do. We could easily put some HMI on it that could easily go to a diagnostic page and it can tell me what the current voltage draws are, right? Or we can go through usage-based grease change versus time-based. So again, if I operate the machine in a given month, cool. I do a pre-use preventive maintenance check and I do a post-use maintenance check. But then I also have 40 maintenance intervals in between if nothing is done, nothing moves. So I thought it was overkill. Yeah. I thought we could do a better use of our time. And I think we lacked a lot of the data to understand.
Yeah. And I guess if we flip that into because what you were talking about earlier, in a manufacturing environment, there's skill shortages and things like that. So that's where being more precise in your maintenance about where to focus your attention becomes more important. But I see the comparison with the military where presumably you're not using that weapon all of the time.
Yeah.
So it's like I said, does it need that level of maintenance? But without the data or the condition monitoring data, you don't really know. So you just do it as a matter of course, as part of the schedule, and that's that. And then it's safe, as it were.
Yeah, because I mean, again, the Navy is very smart. They've been around for a long time. They figured it out, but they're also about the most risk-adverse organization I've ever met, right? Everything has to be bulletproof. You can't, like the Navy, they can't take any chances. And because people change so often, they have to have this extensive, exhaustive program that controls every facet of what people do all day long. The issue becomes now we start to prioritize other functions that are critical to the ship over being able to schedule and do our maintenance. So that's where that pencil whipping came in. Was I, as a maintenance operator, I had all the resources I need. I had the materials, I had the job plans, I had the backing that the system we used was score based. So on a weekly basis, if you complied with the schedule, got everything done, you got 100. If anything moved and wasn't performed, it rolled over to the next week and it just kept hitting your score. So we would do these routine assessments of our work centers, our shops we'd call them, and it was all score based. Like, what is your score? And administratively, are all of your everything validated and squared away through your maintenance index? And it became like a dog and pony show. And it was very much less about did you actually perform the maintenance? And I turned it into more, you have to prove that I didn't do the maintenance, which is the wrong mentality. That's not good for anyone. And I'm not the only one that had that mentality, right? And I'm not the only generation of sailors who have ever come through the Navy on these ships that have had that mentality. So how do we go against the grain there of a culture that has been set in stone for so long and start to make meaningful impact changes? And I think the condition-based monitoring plus that they're going to is going to make some significant changes towards that.
And just on that, so that often with those type of industries, defense and aerospace, the question about cloud often arises. Is that what will hold back, military organizations from fully embracing, let's say predictive maintenance technology or even CMMS technology, I guess, as well?
Cloud, yes, to a certain extent, because on a ship, it's metal. So we have repeaters for a certain type of walkie-talkie that we have on the ship because we use walkie-talkies. And we also have sound power telephones still. But think of the cabling. We only have so much space, and those are pass-throughs between compartments. So they have to be sealed and they be controlled. We have a lot of cabling nowadays through ships. Now imagine if we're hooking up thousands of sensors per equipment to start doing this. So it has to be a local network, and it has to be hardwired. We don't have the ability to do wireless or Bluetooth or anything because it's a steel ship. It's steel bulkheads, right? Certain areas I think are even maybe laced with like the Faraday cage and information. So again, nothing gets in and out, like no signal, no nothing. So I think it's interesting how they're going about it now. To get into those spaces, I think companies like Senseye really has to invest in that offering as a standalone and have to essentially download a version of your offering and really build it out on a local VM or server-based solution, and then figure out all the specifics on how to hardwire into equipment when you're based on a cloud philosophy and Bluetooth connectivity, wireless connectivity, right? And it's a different ballgame. So I think for land-based teams, I think cloud is what they've already been adopting. They've been doing it for a while. I don't think that's hard. But when we're talking about the Navy and seagoing vessels that are floating metal ships, it's a very tough challenge that a lot of very smart engineers are working on right now. And I don't envy them at all. They have a very tough job, and I am not that smart for that job. Let's be honest.
Oh, I'm sure you are. But but I can see the it's mind-boggling, really. Those sort of challenges and the responsibility as well. Is like we're talking about very expensive equipment. Hence why and that's usually the equipment in a manufacturing setting or whatever that's usually over-maintained, right? Because that's what they focus on. And often in predictive maintenance projects, that's again, let's focus on the 5 assets that are causing us the most problems.
Yeah.
But the problem arises because they've been so over-maintained that there never is a problem. And predictive maintenance doesn't actually do the job it's set out to do, which is to spot failure. So
it's all about context. And the trend detection thing, same thing with the business case, right? You need to identify where the potential failure points will be in building your business case and how to communicate this. And you need to try and get ahead of it. Like we talked about, y'all had the article come out about how to prevent failure in an offering that is meant to predict failure. So I thought that was very clever and very interesting.
Yeah, one of our white papers as well, and it's also very much focused around the data piece as well, which we haven't covered. But I thought as we're sort of starting to talk more technology than maintenance, I see our conversation shifting. So I thought, and we've covered a couple of technologies. Obviously, Senseye and Brightly have their own technologies. But could you just give us a broad, from your experience, what technologies some companies or manufacturers are sort of investing in today, to build out that tech ecosystem, as a lot would call it?
So now you're starting to get into areas that obviously I am not the top of the food chain. I do not have much understanding of, but I really geek out on. There's a few people. I've connected a few times with Jeff Winter on LinkedIn. Used to work for Microsoft. I think now is at Hitachi. And he's a digital transformation industry 4.0 expert, right? He's a thought leader in the space. So I follow a lot of his information. I really like statistics, and I like pretty visuals and graphs, which he posts. So he talks a lot about that. I think IoT Analytics also talks about the quarterly earning calls of what CEOs talk about and kind of which ones are growing or fading in importance. And then another person I'll throw out is Walker Reynolds. So Intellic Solutions, or also Industry 4.0. He is I think a solutions architect. He talks a lot about industry, Internet of the Things, IIoT. And he has a lot of old whiteboard videos on YouTube that I have really dived deep into and have learned a lot of information. So it's cool, again, to being that observant person I am, starting to piece together the big picture and how little piece of the pie a true maintenance function is, yet it's still a business pillar that everyone talks about. So what technologies and who are implementing them?
I mean, we could look at we could start with the basics, I guess. What we're both here for, in some ways, is sort of predictive maintenance, CMMS. But there's EAM systems as well, and they all sort of form sort of pieces of the jigsaw. And I guess a lot of those can work in silos if there's not let's say a joined up approach across the enterprise or across plants. What we find is often there's separate. It's very like every plant has their own plan, their own strategy. Whereas the most successful rollout, so purely predictive maintenance here, is a joined up approach across the board with champions or champions leading that from the front and becoming almost an internal salesperson, you could term them as.
I think the first thing for people to do is, again, maybe check out those people I was talking about between Jeff and Walker. They really need to start sifting through the noise of what the buzzwords are and start figuring out what the actual definitions are so they can understand where they need to start. We mentioned digital transformation, Industry 4.0. Some people use those interchangeably. I think you really have to sift through that and figure out what it means and really get to the root of it, which you said. I was looking at the podcast that Nate did, and that's one of the first things Nate said is he's like, I'm not fighting against other solution providers. I'm not fighting against anything other than misconception of what we do and what is the actual benefit, right? It's not some like wizardry that we just come in and solve all your problems. Some people think CMMS is the same thing. Now, looking in the big picture of manufacturing, again, my background and where I really live and thrive is in CMMS, EAM. But go look out there on like in any like the I think Mesa International has the new digital thread. Nothing on there about EAM or CMS. They don't call it out specifically, right? But you're talking about like asset life cycle. And then same thing with the ISA 95 automation stack, right? Where it talks about like edge and how information kind of cascades or flows through an organization in a true integrated format. It's like, okay, with some places say that CMMSs fall into MOMS, which is manufacturing operation management systems, I believe. That may be wrong. And then some others have EAM as a separate bucket. It's like, okay, is CMMS in the same place as EAM or no? Like, what's the difference? So again, people need to understand what the differences are. If we're talking about the lowest level, CMMSs, I think, should be a pillar and critical and a starting point for most organizations for their maintenance efforts, right? You grow into an EAM. I don't think you should start as an EAM. I also don't think you should, without diligent research, procure ERPs and anticipate using their maintenance module. I think a lot of big ERPs do have that, which is fine, right? A jack of all trades, a master of none. That's fine. If it actually fits your need and it fits your solution and what you're looking to accomplish, right? But if you're coming to us saying, hey, we need something easy to use, we just really need it basic and we need it mobile so our guys can use it and we need it to speak their language, you can't not go with the CMMS. It was built for the purpose of maintenance individuals. Most of us build our applications through the lens of maintenance jargon, right? Through maintenance reliability best practices, what SMRP and these different organizations who are trying to standardize the terminology internationally That's a big issue that we have, is the standardization of those definitions of what different things mean in different countries, because there is a language barrier at times, which ISO tries to do a really good job of. I think the CMMS is crucial. I think it's the first place that you start. Now, from there, you don't have to like linearly progress through your maintenance adoption periods and your maturity scale. So we think of going from reactive to proactive, which could include your corrective actions, your failure finding, your routine maintenance, your preventative maintenance stuff, even on to PDM, right? Dave Griffith from the Manufacturing Hub talked about this in a comment that I saw. Was he's been in facilities where maintenance teams struggled to comply with the PM schedules, right? Because they weren't established for them, for their organization. It didn't meet the organization's requirements for service levels. But they did really well at PDM and carrying out PDM recommendations for maintenance, right? And then others, they have no need for PDM. They really just need the basic preventive maintenance routines with some reactive maintenance sprinkled in, right? So you have to find the balance for you. And you don't have to be linear. You don't have to say, I have to have a CMS and they have to grow into an EAM, and then I can grow into PDM, and then I can do this, right? It doesn't have to be linear. You do have a base level, a base function somewhere. I think a CMMS is that, because for maintenance, it's your asset registry. It's your inventory management. It's your work order execution between preventative or scheduled maintenance and non-scheduled maintenance. And it gives them the KPIs or the data that they need to make their decisions at their level or communicate that to decision makers. And I think PDM just really like supersizes it all, takes it to the next level. So people are looking for optimization of your current maintenance resources, I think PDM is the place to go, right? Because it's doing the needed maintenance at the opportune moment, not just when we think based on a preconceived notion when we're supposed to do things. Same thing with the Navy, right? We just over PM things, but that's a procedural and organization mandate. If they do start shifting to predictive maintenance and start using trend analysis and historical data sets to really understand how their assets operate and do a hybrid of the two, they're going to see huge efficiency gains. And then I also think the military needs to start incorporating maintenance and reliability leaders to come teach these people very early on in their career the importance of what they're doing and why they're performing these actions.
No, interesting. I mean, always feel that with predictive maintenance, actually, I guess some, and it's part of the educational bit, I guess, which partly I'm responsible for from a marketing perspective, but like, when's the right time to introduce predictive maintenance? Because like I say, it's very difficult to do it without some of the other layers in place. Mm-hmm. I'm just wondering, is there a misconception, I guess, about what a CMS can do? Because often, I mean, the predictive maintenance or Senseye example is, you turn it on and, you hear AI and the magic happens and then everything's and what you're talking about in that podcast is he does spend a lot of time busting some of those myths, which has to be said, because like I said, we don't want to get into a position where we start engaging with a client and then partway down the road they're like, I thought it was just, and there's a gap between what was expected. But are those expectations the same with someone who's not got CMMS? They're doing maybe more traditional maintenance practices and they want to, go to that next level. Is there a misconception about what a CMS can actually do for them?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I don't think it's as prevalent, because I think predictive maintenance is still in the realm of a buzzword versus the CMMS, right? Has been around since the 80s. Again, I don't know how long PDM has been around. But CMMSs have been around for a long time. And I think most of the time the misconception is it's only for the biggest and the richest, right? Because traditionally, before cloud, before Industry 4.0, right? When we were in true Industry 3.0, the best in breed systems cost you an arm and a leg, and only the biggest and the top dogs could afford it, right? And they also had the organizations to do it, right? A lot of people ask, how much administrative function is this going to take to support? Like, what do you mean by that? Like, they're like, well, do I have to go do this and do that? Blah, blah, blah. There are some misconceptions, not nearly, I think, as many as PDM and what you see on your team. And Nate hit it on the head, is in sales, you get the best of both worlds. You get the good and the bad, unfortunately, right? You get to see all the success stories, and you also get to get on these calls with people, unfortunately, who have these preconceived notions, and it almost turns into less of a presentation and more of, I hate to say, almost education, right? Let's make sure we're talking about the same thing in the same way first. And I need to go against the grain on some of the information that they have, that they preconceived about what CMMSs are, what are the functions of it, what are the uses, the best practices for its use. There are a few of those. And it comes from generally people either having never used a CMMS or using very old antiquated CMMSs up until recently. So still using CMMSs that look like DOS-based systems, right? And then looking at our system like, that's too much. It's too flashy. There's too many colors. So it's like, what's the expectation here?
Please like and subscribe on all major podcast channels and find out more about Senseye Predictive Maintenance at Siemens.com.